Hey, hello. I hope you're doing well and welcome to the fourth video of the JavaScript synchronous, asynchronous, and the promises series. So today we are going to discuss about promise chain. Previously, in our this series, we have discussed various items. We have covered like JavaScript is synchronous by default, but the asynchronous operations are kind of very normal. We do it day in, day out. We use browser APIs or the event handler or be it promises are the one that help us with the asynchronous operations. We have learned about callbacks, right? It's a great way of notifying a caller, like something have happened, and you can actually do something after that. We understand that how the functions can be leveraged as a first class citizen to accomplish this goal. Then we also learned about a bit about promises, like how promises helps with asynchronous operations. How can we actually get states, is values, or the reasons whenever an error happened. So it's an excellent way of handle asynchronous calls. So this is what we have covered so far, and today's goal is basically to talk a little bit further and understand what exactly promise chain is, what exactly mean by promise chain. So as we know about a bit of promises, like promises are as a JavaScript object, a special JavaScript object which take an executor functions which has two special callback function called resolve and reject. Whenever a promise is successfully complete, we have to call resolve, and if it's not, we have to actually call reject from our executor function. We have learned all these basic fundamentals of it, but there are more to it, and that's where the promise chain come into picture. Whenever you are using a promise, the whole and sole purpose of using a promise is for making an asynchronous call. And you as a user would like to know what are the possible outcome of that asynchronous call, isn't it? If you want to know, you have to have some idea about how to get that. Second, you might want to interrelate two or more async operations. What does it mean? It means that an output from one of the asynchronous operation you want to use as an input to another operation, another asynchronous operations. Or again, it can go in cycle. Like you can just go in a chain basically. That's where the promise chain also comes in handy. There is an error, say, while making an asynchronous operation, and you want to handle that error, right? How do you do it? Or you want to probably initialize certain things before you want to make an async call, or clean up certain things after the async call has been made. How do you do it? When the multiple asynchronous calls comes into picture. That's where promise chain come into picture, and the promise chain as accomplished basically with three handler methods called then, catch, and finally. So in this video, we are going to dive into extensively understanding these three handler methods and how to use them. What are the use cases for them? What are the conditions where you have to use each of them? And we'll do a lot of hands-on example to understand them better. Right? So let's get into it. Let's get into the action and try to understand how things works. All right. So as usual, what we'll do, we will get started by creating, a promise, and then we'll see like how this handler methods like then catch and finally comes into picture, right? So let's create a promise first. We have learned this in a previous video already, like how to create a promise. So for creating a promise. Uh, what we'll do is basically uh, let we can do a const promise. Okay, I think I better switch off my copilot because it's going to interfere with me a lot. So I'll just switch it off. All right, it's switched off. Good for all of us. It's not going to interfere anymore. So const promise equals to, it's a JavaScript object, new promise. We know that it takes an executor function, so function, and that executor function also takes two callback functions. One is resolve, and of course another is reject. That's pretty much the syntaxes of promise, like how we create. And then let's assume that what will happen is like this promise resolve with a message, say resolve, and let's say resolving fake promise, right? So this is just very, very simple, promise that we have created. It is really not making any true API calls or things like that, but we are resolving it immediately because our focus is to understand the then, catch, and finally handlers in this video, right? So now I have created a promise. How would I know, like when this promise resolved? How would I know? How would I get this notification, like this promise is resolved? To do that, we will be handling this promise, like handle it using then. So how we'll be handling it? We'll be taking this promise object that we have created, and then we'll call the function called then. And what then does is basically then takes another function, another callback function with the resolved value. So we'll put the resolved value over. So it means when this callback, we know that callback is a great mechanism to notify certain things when certain things happen or won't happen properly. So in this case, whenever this promise resolves, this then has a callback this particular function with the value, the resolve value, it will be automatically called. So if we just try to print console dot log of this particular value, what would we supposed to get over here is basically promise get resolved. So in this case, you see this console.log because I'm resolving this with this message, like resolving a fake promise. And once the promise get resolved, the value pass over here, and I'm just doing a console.log of this value. So this is the first principle of understanding promise change, that every promise gives you a dot then handler method. Whenever there is a resolve or reject, you can handle both using the dot then method. Okay. Actually, dot then method takes two callback functions. The first function is for resolve. Whenever there is a resolve, you can have another callback function with a comma, like function, another error. In that case, it will be like a resolved one, right? So then with both the positive and negative scenario, you can handle it then. But the then syntax for handling error is little bit weird, right? In case you are expecting an error, not expecting a success, what you have to do, you have to pass the first parameter as a null and only handle the second parameter. That's a bit weird. To solve that, JavaScript provides you another function called .catch. So you can use .catch every time on every promise to handle the rejected scenario. So should we see that rejected scenario once quick, like how it works? So what we'll do is like we will just change this one and say reject, and then we'll say rejecting a fake promise, maybe rejecting a fake promise. So once we do this, and if we just change this guy with catch, maybe it is not a value, it's an error in this case. And in this case, it's an error. So we'll just handle this error. And here, one more thing that we need to do: whenever you are actually handling an error within the promise or anywhere in general in JavaScript, instead of just returning a message, you would rather returning the instance of an error object, right? Because what you can do in the error object, not only the particular message that can pass, you can also pass the error code, the more reason of the error, the entire stack trace of the error, and a lot of other things. So it is always a good practice, to do it using the this one. So if you see here, you see it very clearly, like it's giving me the full interest actress, like error rejecting a fake promise at this particular line, and it is like started from this particular line. So you have that complete stack trace with you. So hope we understood the first principle of a promise chain. Before getting into the promise chain, actually, is like every promise gives you a dot then and the dot catch. Dot then you usually use for handling the positive scenario, the resolved scenario. Dot catch you use for handling the rejected scenario. So you understood this, all of this clearly, right? Now we will get into a little bit more with the then method, right? We want to understand the second principle of promise chain. The second principle of promise chain is like The then method, what you can do inside the then method basically. You can do actually three things inside the then method. Let's write them down so that you understand. So inside three things you can do. One, the first thing that you can do inside then method, you can return another promise. Okay. This is where the chaining also come into picture. Like you get a output of making an API call inside the then, and taking the output, you want to initiate another API call. So you will be creating another promise, yeah, and then you'll be returning another promise from the then method. So return another promise. The second thing that you can do, return a synchronous value. What does it mean? It means that a value which is not a promise or not an async call. It's just like a simple synchronous value. Maybe some value is there in the cache, browser cache, or the local storage. You just retrieve and then you send it. So that is possible. And the third thing that you can do from the then function is like return or throw an error. So these are the three things that you basically do from um, the then, and we'll be handling and we'll be seeing all of this with examples now, and we'll see like how those are very useful, right, in case of handling things. So let's see the first one, like where we'll be returning another promise and we'll be handling that. So for that, let's create a promise. So for us, let's create a promise to get user, a simple, again we won't be making a real API call, but we'll be trying to simulate the similar thing, right? So you do a new promise, and then the executor function come into picture. It gets a resolve and reject. So if you're due to promise, the syntax will take a while in the beginning for you to kind of get it, but once you start writing again and again, things will be better. So now we'll create a user object. Assume that this particular user comes from API call. A simple object like say name, John Doe, email, john@email.com, and then we have say password. We usually don't retrieve it, but let's say password. Okay, for the example sake. So you have a user, and then what we do, we'll simply resolve this user over here. So let's understand this promise again. We have a very simple JavaScript promise through which we are resolving our user information. As simple as that. Now, how do we handle this promise, right? Of course, we'll be handling this promise using the then method. So get user dot then. See, I prefer putting all these handler functions calling in the new line, because that way I feel the code is more structured than putting it just right after this get user dot then. Why? Because we will see when we chain it, means we will be calling multiple handler functions. This kind of code structure is much more readable. We'll see that. So it takes a callback, and the callback has a value. We can give any name to this. We'll give user because you're expecting a user object, and this is my function, right? So if I just do this console.log, say got user dot name, right? This much. So it means I have a promise that is resolving a user details, and so once I'm getting this user details, I am printing this user's name just to make sure that I have got the details correctly. So that's what this particular stuff is going to do, and going to give me one bracket is missing. Of course, it is. It's because of this. So it is going to return me the particular user details, and once the user details I am able to get, it will be able to give me the correct one. I missed the dot. Okay, so it will be able to give me the user details correctly. Now, once I get this user details correctly, once I am retrieving this user details correctly, what is the next thing that I am going to do? So it's saying got user John Doe. So I'm getting the user details. Now, next thing that I am telling, we are demonstrating the first principle of our then is like returning another promise from here. So what we'll be doing, let's say I'm getting this username, and with this username, I am trying to retrieve this particular user's address. Let's simulate that. So return another promise with user address, right? So that's the next code that we have. So for that, what we will do create a new promise again, new promise. Again, the executor function takes two callback. Always kind of tell like this, talk to yourself like this when you create promise for a couple of times. It will be really used to. And let's say here we are mimicking an API call, like we'll be taking this username, sending back to the backend API, and we'll get the address. Instead of doing that, we'll just mimic it, like we'll put a set timeout basically to take some time, mimic some time, and maybe 1 second time, and after that what will return the address. So we'll resolve this guy saying that maybe address is Bangalore, right? Fair enough. So we did this. Now this is great. Now first we have one promise to get the user. We have resolved the username. And once the username has been resolved, now we are actually returning another promise from here. With that promise, what we are returning, that when that second promise gets resolved, we'll be getting the address of this particular user, after 1 second of time, like we said in there. Now, how am I going to resolve this address? How am I going to get this particular address information? Where am I going to get? This is where the chain come into picture, the chaining come into picture, right? So for every promise, again, to tell it again, for every promise, there is a then, there is a catch, there is a finally. So that means this promise, whenever it returns, we should be able to catch its value. Catch is not right word. We should be able to get its value, its resolved value using the then, and then we'll be able to do whatever we want to do, right? So it means I can actually now chain this one with another then function and get the address like this, and then I can actually print the address over here. So you can print the address like console.log user address is $address, right? So this is possible, pretty much possible. So please understand what we did. We first get the user information. After getting the user information, we are actually turning another promise to get his address after a second, and then we are actually handling that using the .dot method to get this address. I hope that this is kind of completely makes sense. Like how it prints also here. First we get the user John Doe, and then after 1 second it just print the stuff out that its address is Bangalore, right? So the next thing that we are going to do is our second principle is like from that then function what exactly you can do. The then function you can simply return another value, right? Here we have returned a promise, right? We have returned a promise over here. So if you probably have a case like you just don't want to return a promise. Instead of that, what you want to return, you just want to return a static value or some cached value. So let me just change this guy a bit and then return say user dot email. This is a very synchronous value. It's not an asynchronous value. You are not making any other call at all, right? So you can do this, and here in this case you can change it to email to make sense this variable as email, and you can actually print like user email kind of thing. So what will happen is like in this case we are not really returning anything after making an asynchronous call. Rather we are making a call to return a very synchronous value which is like email that you see over here, right? We're returning an email. So that is the second case, and the third case that I told is like you can throw an error, right? From the then itself, you can throw an error, and then you can catch that error somewhat later point of time to handle that. That's the third thing that you can do, right? So let's see that as well. So to see that, let me modify our user object a bit. So in the user object, let me put, let's say, one more key called permission with the value of, let's say, db hr, maybe dev. Yeah. So it means that this particular user has this sort of permissions like to handle the db, hr, and dev kind of thing. Now coming back to our then where we were returning a synchronous value like an email value, what we'll be doing now? We'll be now throwing an error from here. So let's throw an error like if, let's say, if the user dot permission dot includes HR. It means that if the user permission has HR as a permission is an array and includes is an method of an array to figure out like a particular value is there in the array or not, and it will return true or false accordingly. So we know that in this case it will be true because HR is already there. And then what we'll do is like, let's say throw new error, you are not allowed, right? So you'll say you are not allowed. That's the message. Now, great. This is the third thing. Like from then we can actually throw an error when we're throwing an error. But how are I going to handle this error? This error, if you're trying to handle, the simplest thing that I told is like every promise return, gives us a catch for handling error. So we can chain now the catch method. So it means that in this hierarchy, if there is any error comes or if there is any error thrown from anywhere, from any then, the content will directly come to this catch where we should be able to handle the stuff. So catch, of course, it takes a callback function error, and then what we'll be able to do, we'll be able to do a console dot log of error so that we get the trace correctly. So in this case, our expectation is first it will print the username as John Doe, and then it is going to give us why this particular permission is not included. Then it is going to throw an error for us, and once the error is thrown, it's going to come back here. But we see something happen is unexpected token semicolon at the line number 25. Let us fix that first. Yeah, of course, it's a JSON, so you cannot have a semicolon. So remove this, and we'll be running this again. So once we run this, you should be able to get the required thing. So you see this in the console log. First we get the user information John Doe, and then of course the error that comes up like saying that you are not allowed, right? So we now see in all the three cases from then. Just to reiterate for you, all the three cases from the then you can return another promise, or you can return a synchronous value, or you can throw an error from the then, right? So whenever you are handling anything in the promises, why do you need promise? For making async call, maybe an API call. You can actually, after getting an API call, you can make another API call by taking the output value of your first API call. Or you can actually take something from maybe the local cache as a synchronous value. Or there is an error condition. So all this condition you can handle inside promises. I hope that this kind of clarify things for you, right? So this is cool. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is like the next rule, which is very, very important. And I think that most of the people get really bogged down or don't understand this clearly. So they actually do mistakes or find bugs. So in case of promise chain, the calling of this dot then method multiple times on a single promise is not forming a promise chain. Okay, I'll reiterate it once more. Like if I'm creating a promise and calling the dot then method multiple times on the same promise object doesn't form a promise chain. In this case, if you have seen, or the previous case you have seen, this then is called on this particular promise that was written from here. But the subsequent then or catch is not called on the same promise. Is basically called from another promise that was done from the dot then, right? So these two are two different things. So let's see it by example so that we can clearly understand like what exactly I mean. So let us create one promise const, we'll call it as number, right? Because it is going to resolve a particular number, and we'll see new promise, execute a function, take two callbacks, resolve and reject, bracket. Okay, it what it does basically is very simple. Resolve a number. Okay, it resolve a number called 10. Now what we're going to do, we'll take this number promise and we will do dot then of callback value, and we'll do a value plus plus, increment it. From then we can return a synchronous value, so we'll return this particular value. Okay, this is our first dot then handling. So we have a number, we have a promise which resolve a number 10. So it means 10 comes here until it will just increment by 1, it becomes 11 and it return this particular value. Okay, we won't stop here, what we'll be doing, we'll be taking the same promise and we will call this then function 3 more times. 2 more times, basically total 3 times. So first I'm incrementing to value equals to value plus 1. Then next I'll be doing value equals to value plus 10 and then return the value. And maybe the last time we'll be doing value equals to value plus 20. Right? So first I incremented by 1, then incremented by 10, then incremented by 20. And when it comes to the last one, maybe what I can do is like I can just do a console.log of it here, value. So what do you think the value is if when it gets printed over here, what exactly the value is? Is it 10 or the value is 30 or value is 21 or 41 or none of the one? What exactly? Any guesses for this particular value? So let's see this again. It's resolve 10. So that means the 10 comes here. It become 11. Return 11. Then what exactly the number here? Is the number 11 or is the number 10 or what exactly the number over here? What do you think the value is going to be? So what will happen over here? We are calling the dot then on the same promises multiple times. This is not forming a chain. This is actually calling dot then multiple times on the same promises. So this will come 10. So it will be 11. We are not printing anything over here. It will return 11. But this return is of no use because we are not calling a then again on top of this over here. Had we call dot then function value over here, we would have handled this value, this return value 11 from here, but we are not doing that. Again, we are actually resolving number again here from fresh. So again, the number is 10, value is 10, 10 plus 10 is 20, again is returning 20. But again, we are not handling this 20 anywhere. Third time, what we are doing, we are again taking this number 10 and then what we are doing this value plus 20, which is basically 30, and then we are doing a console.log of 30. So it will be again, so at last it is going to print 30. So that's what is going to happen. It is not going to do anything beyond that. But in the actual scenario, actual real life scenario, this is something that you may not want, right? You probably, what you want is basically, you probably want this incremental value to be passed one by one. So for example, the number resolved 20 is become, 10 is become 10 plus 1, 11. Then you want to return this 11, catch this 11, make it 11 plus 10 is 21. Then again you want to pass this 21 to the next one, then make 21 plus 20 equals to 41. So to do that, what exactly you need to do, you should not be doing things in this way. Rather, you should be forming a chain. So this then comes, so it means from here you should have this then, Control C, I'll just paste it over here, then again, then the third then, Control C, I'll paste it over here, and you don't need any of this code from here. So if you see this now, this is quite perfect. We don't need this to return because we are not doing anything with this. Now it is quite perfect because you have a number and you are resolving the 10, and on this particular number, in the particular number promise, you are actually doing this 10 and then incrementing it and making it 11. Again, it's coming down, becoming 21, and then at the end, it will become 41. So that's basically how you should be doing this, how you should be making this one properly. So let me just cut paste this one at the top to get the output properly. All right, so we see the value is kind of 41. It's coming as 41. Yeah, there's a small typo of P small here. I change it to capital. So now we see that how the promise chain works, right? So hope you understand that that calling the then functions on the same promise multiple time doesn't make a chain. Rather, this is what exactly the chain is, right? So now we are actually coming towards the end of this one. I'll just talk about one more stuff called finally, and with that we'll be wrapping up today's video of promise change. So what is finally? Finally is another handler method. Basically, there is a difference between finally and the then and catch that we have learned so far. The biggest difference is like finally handler doesn't process the result at all. So if you've seen, both dot then and catch have the ability to process the result. It means that it can take the result and then it can make another asynchronous call or return a synchronous value or return an error, return another promise. It can do a lot of stuff. But from finally, you actually don't do that. It is because finally doesn't process any result to the next handler, like then passes the result to next handler, right? You get the value, return the value, catch it over here, or you can catch the error in a catch. But in case of finally, you don't do it. But then why exactly finally used if we don't do it? We can run finally handler on both a resolved or the rejected promise. It is a very very handy method to perform any sort of cleanup operation, right? Like you probably started a loader in the beginning, right? A spinner or a loader, and you want to stop it after a particular call is successfully resolved or certain things is rejected, or you want to close a connection to database. So for this kind of cleaning work, you can use finally. So let's see a kind of simple example, like to see like how finally can be constructed. So for that, let us again create a promise. So we'll create a promise, uh, new promise of executor function with resolve and reject, right? Callback function, and then you have this promises over here, and let's resolve this promise with a message saying testing. Oops, no testing finally, right? A simple message that we'll resolve with, and this is our promise. Great. So what I can do is like promise dot similarly finally, like how we used to do catch and then, but here it's just a callback function, doesn't have any value. Like we have seen in case of then we have seen there is always a value in the function. In case of catch, we have seen error. In this case, nothing. And you can do anything basically. You can do console dot log, you know, cleaned up, something like that. But one good thing is you can actually call or chain another then or another catch, on top of finally. So it means that though finally doesn't pass, any particular value down the chain, but what it is basically doing is basically it is allowing you to chain another dot then. For example, this then you can do over here, you know, function value, and then you can actually catch this particular value over here. So now see the use case correctly, the final use case. So if you would have started a spinner or loader somewhere here, or started a database connection over here or inside this, and now you are making this particular API call, and you know that when the API call is done, before I go ahead and process this value whatsoever, I want to close a connection or I want to stop the loader, I can do it right over here. as a finally, right? So here I can actually do all this loader stuff. I can do closing the database connection stuff. And once this is done, then I'll be getting my, the responses as usual over here. So I hope that the finally is clear as you're seeing over here. It's cleaned up. First, the cleaned up comes into picture, and then we have this testing finally basically over here. The value. Don't worry about this 41 that is coming from the previous example, as these are async calls. There is no guarantee at what sequence they'll be coming back. That's why you see 41 in between. But focus on this cleaned up and the testing finally. So hope this finally is also clear, and you now know like what exactly promise chain is, what exactly dot then dot catch and dot finally handler methods are, how they are useful. Please find the GitHub link in the description section of this particular video, where you should be able to practice some of this with some quizzes and examples that are there. I have posted some of this so that you can actually start practicing this. And I hope you liked today's video. Please comment if you have any questions. Drop it here or find me on Twitter. I should be able to clarify your doubts further. And in the next video, we will see our most anticipated topic called async await, and we'll be explaining the async await in quite in detail with similarly with a lot of examples. And following to that, our last video of the series, where we'll be taking one real life example. We'll write that with using callback, then we'll actually translate that to a promise, and then we'll be translate that to async await, so that we can actually see the entire journey and we understand like what is difficult where and how to tackle certain things in certain ways, and what is the right way of doing certain things or solving certain use cases, right? So two more videos in this series is pending, or it will be coming very soon. So thank you very much for listening to me. But if you're new to this channel, please subscribe to this channel so that you get to know what I'm sharing and what I'm teaching. And if you have any suggestions for my improvement or anything, please feel free to DM me on Twitter. I should be able to listen you and do that accordingly. So thank you very much. Please take care of yourself. I'll be coming back soon with my async await video, which is the next one. Thank you.